I made a joke a few weeks ago. For those of you who are like, that's weird. Is that on purpose? Is that like the call to worship? I made a joke a few weeks ago. I said we have not gone in the last 6 years a Sunday gathering without a metal water bottle being kicked over on the recording. So we record the teaching for people that are in kids or aren't here, and we haven't gone a single one without somebody knocking over their lovely, sustainable drinkware and it clinking along. So as soon as it happened, everybody's like. And then half the group was like, I never knew that, and I've completely ruined it for them every time that it happens. And so we got out of the way early. Thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like that's a sacrificial move of somebody to be like, I'm going to do it now so that we can roll. Church people can be crazy people. Sometimes when you show up, you have no idea what you're going to get. Like maybe some of you here are a little nervous as I lead off with that. But it can be a little wild. I was in a church gathering once, and I kid you not, where the people are all gathered, the speaker is communicating, and they're teaching about hidden sin. So it's ways that we rebel against God that we don't tell anybody else, and we just kind of keep locked in our heart thinking nobody's ever going to know. And their point was our own personal sin always affects somebody else, and which is true. That's not untrue. And then their point or their implication at the end is they said, all right, so if you're really going to trust God, and everybody's like, half the group's like, other half's like, oh no, nope. If you're really going to trust God, what I want you to do, and I kid you not, give your phone to your neighbor and let him browse your search history. Well, at that point, everybody who didn't have a phone was super stoked. The other, and like everybody in the room, and it wasn't that many, but everybody in the room kind of like shifted. Like it was my first time there, and I was like, I don't even know that I want to give you my passwords. Like I don't know you that way. And so there's sometimes when you get together with a church community, you don't know what's going to be said, and as they say it, you're like, oh no, that's not for me. Here's the deal. Today, I promise you, in the next 20 minutes, as we walk out of here with our implication, you will be glad to do what we're talking about. We've been going through the blessed rhythms, and so these are 5 rhythms for everyday discipleship. We believe following Jesus doesn't just happen in our minds, but it happens in our bodies every day as we live life. We believe that people are starved and hungry for the good life. And we set up our lives trying to find a way to live out our ideal world, right? And sometimes we feel trapped by that. Sometimes we feel enslaved by that. Sometimes we feel liberated and like life is working the way it ought to. And so we use 5 rhythms: bless, listen, eat, speak, Sabbath. This artwork's done by Kenzie. I asked her to do it. Each week we're going to be, love you. Each week we're going to be, she's my daughter. I don't just say it to anybody that claps, just so we're aware. I guess everybody doesn't know that. But no, bless, listen, eat, speak, Sabbath. These rhythms are 5 rhythms that we say as followers of Jesus, as we participate in these things with God, with one another, and with our neighbors, we start to see the life that we've always wanted emerging. As we follow Jesus and we bless others as one of the ones, that we seek their flourishing. That life is formed in us that's beautiful. As we listen to God and listen to our neighbors and listen to our friends, we begin to be shaped in a pretty profound way by God's intention for our lives, which is one of the points of it. Charlie taught through Sabbath, so in a world that's crazy with the hustle culture, to slow down, to reorient, to stop and Sabbath once a week, 24 hours, just taking that break. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest is a rhythm that God knit into creation that restores our humanity and moves us right from feeling like we're human doings to human beings again, when we're able to orient by God and in His story. And then today's rhythm is eat, which I think might be arguably the favorite one of the group. That's why the food's just really good today, right? But we want to look at this rhythm, and it might seem weird that you spent all the time to get ready, to wake up, to get over here, and we're going to talk about eating food. We're going to talk about Jesus and eating food. It's the two of them together. But this rhythm that we have is one that is so beautiful, and it's one that we all practice. And with it a little intentionality, I think it could even be more beautiful for all of us. Each of these rhythms, as we practice them, move us closer into the story of God. That is that God is doing something in creation. We learn about Him and who we are and what we're supposed to do as we are in the text of Scripture. But as we practice those, it also draws us into the story more. And as we're drawn into the story more, we're going to want to practice these things as well. And so what I want us to do is to spend the next few minutes, though, really centering your hearts on worship. And so what is one of the best meals you've ever eaten? Turn to just like 2-3 people, because there's not a lot of time for this. Turn to a few people around you. What is one of the best meals that you have ever eaten? Lock eyes with somebody and then start talking. Ready? Go. I want you to listen to the sound of people talking about food. That conversation, by the way, was much more robust than the one where the person asked us to share our cell phones. But believe it or not, there is a reason that food and joy are tied so tightly together. There is a reason that us eating can bring a smile to our face. Yes, there is a complicated relationship we have with food. It's true. But in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, and he made human beings hungry, that was before, right? Before sin entered the world, wasn't it? As we understand it, Genesis 1 and 2, which is the first arrow in that list of creation, God created the world good, right, and beautiful, no sin, and people still had an appetite. That means that there was something good about us needing God, needing food, and there was a way to satiate that, that dare I say could be both delicious and nutritious, without gluttony, without that complicated relationship, without avoiding, but able to participate in this good gift of what God created. It's also ironic, or even telling maybe, that in the second act of that story, that X, Genesis 3 through 11, which is represented there, that it is food that Eve eats, saying, I want to be able to say what's right and wrong. God had told him you can eat from any tree in the garden, enjoy it, mix it up, spice it up, do whatever you want. All the trees, eat of them, enjoy it. But one tree, don't eat of that tree, because the day you do, you're going to die. Big news. And so they could eat of any tree, but they go after that one tree because it looks good, and it says that she took it, and she ate it, and then handed it to her husband Adam, who was there with her. And because of that choice, the world came under a curse, as Genesis says it. Sin entered the world, brokenness, rebellion, devastation, starvation instead of just hunger, abuse, loneliness, gut-wrenching anxiety, shame, all in that moment as humans rebelled against God. But God doesn't leave the world without hope. Genesis 12 all the way through Malachi 4 is what that next arrow represents, and that's the time we call the promise. And so all throughout Israel's history, you can watch the nation of Israel. When God says, all right, I'm going to bless you, and through you all the nations of the world will be blessed, God's relationship with this nation Israel back then was such that he would often use food as a way for them to celebrate and enjoy God. There was also foods that they weren't supposed to eat, which showed that they trusted God, not just how good their taste buds were, because they had to put away with bacon back then, right? Like, that's a good, and God's like, you have to trust me more than bacon. And for some of us, that would be a genuine struggle. Others of us are like, good, that's meat, get it out of here. We love you both. There would also be meals when they were in the desert and they had to be hungry and they had to trust God. God, will you provide? Remember that meal of manna that would come out every single day, and they'd have to go out daily and trust. And if they tried to hoard too much for themselves, it turned to like worms the next morning. They couldn't do it. So God used food to regularly remind them of their dependency on him. And then remember, like the next act of the story, Jesus, redemption, the life, the death of Jesus. One author, a guy named Tim Chester, says, if you were to ask, how did Jesus come to this earth? Like, what was he doing? What was he here for? He's like, you get three very distinct answers in the scripture. 3 times it says what Jesus did. He came to seek and to save that which was lost. Massively important. He came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. That's Mark 10. And then the third thing it says, the Son of Man came what? Eating and drinking. Of the 3 ways that it says this big word, Son of Man, apocalyptic character, the one who was going to come and make everything right that had been promised way back in the beginning of the story. The way that he came was eating and drinking. Charlie just put together a wonderful resource for us going through the blessed rhythms. And he says that the first question he asks is a great one. He says, if you were to look for Jesus in your town, imagine you were told Jesus was here, where would you go look for him? Many times our mind goes, well, I would go to the church building, or I would go to this Bible study. And the odds are, if you were looking for Jesus, you should start looking at dining room tables. It might take a little while to find him because there's a lot of them that he frequented. Remember when we saw the story of Matthew the tax collector? Jesus shows up and tells him to follow him, and then Matthew throws his retirement party for all his friends, right? Matthew 9. He throws his retirement party, and it's all these sinners. It's the prostitutes, it's the other tax collectors, it's the hustlers, it's the people who hung out in the back alleys. He gathers them all together so they can meet Jesus. And he says, you got to meet this dude. And it happens around a meal. And the Pharisees look in, and they're the ones judging him, saying, you can't do that. Beautiful way of looking at food is to look through the Gospels and pay attention. How many memorable meals do you see? I'm going the wrong way. How many memorable meals? We share them today, but think about the ones that Jesus had. Just in Matthew, we've read about multiple. As you extend that out to Luke, he is always eating. Another author says that Jesus basically eats his way through the Gospel of Luke. Many of us want to trace other theological themes, but this one is pretty powerful. And if you were to read the Gospels and say, Jesus, how am I supposed to be doing this discipleship thing? What's the context I do it in? You cannot read the Gospels and come away saying anything other than it happens at a table. Yes, it happens other places, but it essentially takes place around a table. In fact, we'd say sharing meals is an essential discipleship rhythm in a disconnected world. How many of us, not just other places, eat meals not with people but with screens? How many of us eat with people but not really with people but with screens? Eating together has a way of drawing us back together in the shared humanity. We'll get to this, but it has a way of drawing us back together in powerful ways, and we're designed that way. That's why you get excited to talk about food. That's why you get excited to tell each other about the best meal. Nick's Alfredo is legendary. They all said it. Nick's Hawaiian French toast, and you have to go on vacation with him in Hawaii to get that one, is legendary. Just ask these guys. Why? Because God's wired us that way. We share life, we share memories, we share joy. Our culture forms around food, and that's true of every culture. Every culture is that way. Another way to word it is that sharing a meal is a meaningful missional practice. It moves us closer to the heart of God and into the art of being known and knowing. Both those take place as we eat. We begin to extend grace to others, but then receive grace ourselves even in that moment. I was feeding little Johnny Beats the other morning. He decided he would wake up at whatever hour. Kay does a lot of the waking up, but that little dude, he's eating right now. Look at him go. But while I was holding him the other day feeding him, I had my phone in my other hand because I'm a great person. And so I'm feeding him, but he can eat his bottle without me looking at him, right? Wrong. He started a new thing where he would only eat with eye contact. And so I had a whole way I was going to tell this story, and you wouldn't know it was him, but I can't because of time. And so just, he only eat the eye contact, right? So I'm eating there, and then he did the thing, like if you've ever held a baby and they're eating, they get to a certain age and they start just gripping onto a finger too, and they'll only eat like with one hand holding onto your finger and like the bottle, right? Eating it, but with eye contact. The second I looked away to my phone to see whatever else I wanted to do that day, he was like, I'm like, oh, you little, maybe once it's a fluke. 4 times later, I'm like, all right, let's talk, right? And so then I'm talking to him, looking at him. But what you realize, and this is essential in bonding, this is in any of your child psychology books, those moments of uninterrupted gaze are massively meaningful in the development of a child. I think God knows that. And so he gives us maybe not the lock stare that little Johnny Beats needs, that little baby in the back, but the idea of looking across a table and sharing meals and flavors and tastes, but also looking at people and hearing their stories matters. And it's an essential practice if we're to pattern our lives after Jesus. Absolutely essential. Why is that, though? Like, why are meals so important? I would encourage you in your missional community or with your family, maybe around a table even later today, to ask this question, and you will come up with a different 3 answers. This list is about 20 long, and I just took 3 for today because we have boundaries, right? So I had 3 for today. First, saying they remind us that we are all needy and God provides. The fact that we repeatedly come back to something outside of us to sustain us matters. And I think God designed us that way so that we would be regularly reminded of our neediness for Him. 3 times a day for most of us. At least once every few days for all of us, because you're here. We eat. And every time we do, it's meant to remind us that we are needy for Jesus. And as we eat, He provides. Second, meals provide a space for us to cultivate creation. So the flavors that are there, we get to cultivate. Kenny sent me a picture this morning of their breakfast, which looked bomb. So Ramon made it, right? So it looked delicious. So wish he was hanging at your house. It was delicious. And he goes, this is our first eating sermon of the day. Ramon had taken the ingredients and cultivated them in such a way that they brought a grand amount of joy, glory to God, and filled your bellies, right? All those things are important when it comes to food. Cultivating the creation, but community is also formed around a table. Extending a table invite to somebody is meaningful in every culture I've been in. It doesn't matter if I'm making coffee with an elderly woman in Ethiopia and she's roasting the beans and serving popcorn with it, because that's how they rock their coffee. You eat popcorn while they roast the beans. Pretty good deal. Or if I'm drinking coffee in Colombia with my friend there, and we're drinking there, and we're around the table sharing stories and talking. When I'm in Mexico and we're getting tacos, because arguably they rival Phoenix for the best tacos. Rival us. Yeah, that's right. He's about to walk out. Remember that one time Ramon walked out? When you're hanging out in a village in Africa, wherever it is, in the Middle East, in an Asian country, in a Pacific island, the act of getting food, preparing it, and presenting it to others forms community. And I don't think we should overlook that in our fast food culture. It was never just meant to be a means to an end, but to build into something so much bigger. If the people of God had the best meals and invited the most diverse groups, we would look an awful lot like the early church. So much so that an Emperor Julian, when he was talking about the way that the early church acted, he's like, they're loving their poor better than we do, and so our poor are becoming part of their church. So would you go out and start loving the poor? And he tried to tell the people of Rome to do that, and Rome tried it for a little while, and it all failed because they did it without the power that comes from the Spirit, which was filling the church. But the early church was known for their meals. In our cities, in our towns, and our neighborhoods is the same true, that we welcome a diverse group of people to our neighborhood and our table, and we're willing to go to the table of others who others might avoid. Both of those essential for Jesus. And then they extend the hospitality of God. Our table should be one of the most diverse places in our neighborhoods. Because God is a God who welcomes in the nations all sorts of people. Again, if you just tracked through Matthew and saw the type of people that Jesus hung out with, from religious radicals on the right side, to liberals on the left side, to the really resolute who believed one way about politics in the world, this isn't our world, this was Jesus' world, right? Ours doesn't do this. To people who had very strict dietary laws, to people who only ate a certain way or would only eat after doing certain things, Jesus is seen at all their tables, eating and sharing the good news. And so the invitation for us is to see our tables the way that Jesus saw his. To remind us that we are all needy and God provides. What would it look like to have that be part of the rhythm of how we eat? Meals provide space, again, today, to cultivate creation and community. Are we using them that way? And meals extend the hospitality of God. So we've got the table as well. It's not just your table in your home, though that's important. Jesus, when he wanted to leave his followers with something to do to remember and reorient regularly to the good news of the gospel. The good news that Jesus lived, he died, he rose again, and that changed world history. For us in the church, he wanted us to remember that. What did he give us? He didn't give us a lecture that we all memorize. He didn't give us a textbook that we all had to read in order to get in. He gives us a meal. We call it communion. The elements, the bread and the wine, the bread and the juice, as a way to remember his life, his death, his resurrection. And all three of those things are still true in the meal that Jesus gave us, which, by the way, is a great short book if you want to read up on communion. It's called The Meal That Jesus Gave Us. It's fantastic. But think about this. Even as we come to the table today, the table reminds us that we are all needy and God provides. Every single week, if you're a follower of Jesus, you come up here and you receive the bread which someone baked to give to you, to remind you that Jesus really did live and he really did die. There's a lot in this world that is crazy. There's a lot we don't understand. There's a lot that we're confused and concerned and uncertain about. But the rooting in the story of, no, this is true about Jesus, as we hold that broken bread. And we move and we grab the juice and remember that it took his blood to make a new covenant, that he will never leave us, and he will one day make all things new. And so we come and we take that little cup in remembrance of Jesus. There are a million different ways that people can do this same act. That's how we do it together. But we want to be reminded that we are needy, and that's okay. God is not put off by your neediness. You're like, most people are. God is not. And he provides the shame, the guilt, the weight, the feelings of inadequacy. As we come, we're reminded that he is more than enough. The table is space to cultivate and nourish our community. We do this as a shared expression because we want to see this community formed as people of the table. And the table extends the hospitality of God. The reminder that each and every week as new friends come to the table, the requirement isn't that they've passed a certain number of classes. It's not that you've tested into something. It's, do you trust Jesus and bow to him as Lord? Is Jesus Lord? Yes, he is. I'm trying to figure out what that looks like to follow him. I still got a lot of sin. I'm still working through that. Yes, but the confession that Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again, and I submit to him. Welcome to the table that is open. It's not one ethnicity. It's not one socioeconomic group. But anyone who would respond is welcome to the table. Each week, we've been ending with a challenge, and this one's a tough one. Like I said, would you turn to your neighbor and show them your search history? There's too much Taylor Swift in there. That was me. That wasn't you. That was me. Don't worry. It's cool. Here's the simple challenge. This week, would you share a meal or a drink with 3 people, at least one of which is not a follower of Jesus? One of the worst things is that Christians just eat meals together and they forget that there's a whole world out there that thinks very differently, and then they forget, and you can't love people that you're not around. The meal is not a way to convert somebody, but it's a great place to get to learn and listen to your neighbors. And so you have neighbors that don't know Jesus, invite them to the table too. If you're the kind of person that's like, I'm looking for loopholes, you can do one meal with 3 people. Do you see that? It's just 3 people. So for those of you that are like, I don't have 3 different ones, most of us eat 21 meals. What if we thought creatively and proactively about the way that we use them? What would it look like if 80 people are released this week to welcome 3 different people around their table? Beautiful, beautiful reflections of the kingdom taking place. And so that's the challenge for this week. Those of you that return next week, we'll ask how it went. But the hope really is that we take these things, not just lock them in our minds somewhere, but that we remember this is the kind of people that God has called us to be. We feast at the table, which we'll do now. We invite friends and neighbors and strangers around the table to remember the good news of Jesus. And we together as a community are sent out to extend until the day, the end of the story wraps up, and the picture is a feast of people of every tribe and tongue and nation, all those who have bowed their knee to King Jesus, and I like to imagine are at a big, long, extended table, stretching out, enjoying God as the forever King at a meal together, remembering it's by his grace, we're a community, and this is what he's accomplished throughout the history of the world. Would you guys pray with me? Jesus, we are so grateful for a simple thing like food. We're grateful for your grace. We're grateful for your mercy. God, for those of us that wrestle and struggle with feeling accepted, would we remember as we look at the Gospels that you welcome everyone to your table, regardless of their background, regardless of the messes they've gotten themselves into, that anyone who turns to you is welcome. And God, would you also form us as a people, as men and women and children, who together extend that invitation to our neighbors, our classmates, our coworkers, friends and strangers alike. Because you have extended much hospitality to us, would we extend it to others? We ask this in your name, Jesus, and the power of your Spirit. Amen. The way we do communion around here is that everyone will loop around this way. And, Johanna, will you hold? Cool. Kaylee Ann was going to, but she is in the middle of burping, and that's not going to go well. Johanna will have the bread over here. I'll have the juice. And just come along if you're a follower of Jesus. There will be a bit of a traffic jam, and that's okay. Life is messy. Mission is messy. Following Jesus can be messy, and so we just embrace it. And after everyone's been served, just return to your seat as you get it, and then we'll take communion together as one family. But Missio Mesa and friends, you are welcome to the table.